Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. So, Steve Saylor is a very influential journalist, though often infamous in many circles, but he does excellent work and he's come out with a new book called Noticing. He's joining us from his incredible closet studio. Steve, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. We're going to be diving into social science, statistics, and everything you're not supposed to talk about when it comes to race. But before we do, guys, let's go ahead and hear from today's sponsor. Hey, guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Job Stacking. More paychecks, less hustle, working from home. That's what job stacking is all about. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then consider joining the Job Stacking Mentorship Program. The program was designed by Rolf Halse to help you successfully implement a strategy that'll allow you to collect multiple paychecks from different jobs without burning out or getting caught by your employer. Job stacking has already helped many people double or even triple their income. Luke Hill, a financial analyst living in the UK, has used job stacking to stack 3 jobs and went from making 5K a month to making 15K a month. But job stacking hasn't just increased income, it's also helping many of our guys gain more independence by no longer being a slave to debt or a single employer who hates their values. Andrew Gustafsson, a credit analyst from Australia, is now stacking 4 salaries, which he used to pay off personal and student debt while buying a home for his family. If you don't currently have a remote job, no worries. The program is also designed to help you land remote jobs so you can get started. So if you want to double your income and stop relying on a single paycheck from a woke employer, go to jobstacking.com/start now. That's jobstacking.com/start now. You can use the promo code Auron and book your call with Rolf today. All right, guys, and before we begin, I just want to remind you that, of course, we are coming on to election season, which means we're also entering into censorship season. The Supreme Court has just sidestepped the issue over whether the administration can go ahead and collude with social media companies to censor people like myself and others who speak on political topics. So if you want to go ahead and support me and everybody else who broadcasts over at The Blaze, you can do so by going to blazetv.com and using the promo code Auron to get $20 off your subscription to Blaze TV. That'll also allow you to go ahead and catch my commentary along with everybody else on the Blaze on the debate tomorrow. So go to blazetv.com and use Auron to get $20 off. All right, so Steve, you're again probably one of the more influential journalists over the last few decades, but so often you're also untouchable. People aren't allowed to notice or reference your noticing in their work. What has turned you into somebody who everyone reads, but no one wants to admit to reading?
I don't really know after all these years. I mean, I'd probably have to say it's probably poor career management on my part that I just haven't really been, focused like a laser beam on how to claw my way to the top of the career stack. And I just kind of do whatever I want to do, and that backfires, and I just keep on doing and saying the things I want to say. I don't know after all these years. I think if anything, it's because I tend to come across as this really reasonable guy who knows a lot of basic facts about this America, what the social science says, who observes a lot about daily life from a pretty normal point of view. And then I put it together in kind of a big picture that tends to scare people, I guess. That it's like, well, what if Saylor is right? Then that would be horrible. Especially that would mean, well, I've been wrong, and therefore maybe he should have my job. No, that's the worst possible conclusion they can come to. I don't know. So it's been going on forever, and I just keep doing what I do. And at the moment, I'm sort of more popular than ever, but I've been doing this a long time, and I have a lot of ups and downs over the decades.
Yeah, that kind of multi-decade overnight success there for you all of a sudden.
Yeah, I
Um,
started writing for National Review in 1994. I've been a full-time opinion journalist since 2000. So I've kind of seen it all over the years.
and often you made some pretty good predictions, made given some good advice. One of the pieces I wanted to focus on was the sailor strategy. Kind of the number one thing that Republicans don't want to do, it seems like, is win more white voters. They constantly are focused on how can we appeal to Hispanic communities, African American communities, Asian communities, anybody except focusing on kind of a core demographic that reliably votes in their favor. One of the things that you suggested in one of the essays collected in your book previously is that the Republican Party could make very small adjustments to win over a large amount of the white working class that hadn't really been accounted for previously in their strategy. And then Donald Trump did a lot of that in 2016. But he still continues to seem to chase this dragon. There's a lot of talk about how the African American community is on the verge of flipping entirely for Trump, or he just did a speech where he talked about stapling passports to any community college degree, so you could go ahead and get more immigration that way. Why is it so the case that even when this strategy works, it seems like something the GOP runs away from?
Yeah, I mean, right after the 2000 Bush Gore election, while the recount was still going on, I went through the results, such as they were at that point, and looked at the Electoral College and went, wow, the Republicans could have run away with this if they had just done a little better in the Rust Belt states of the North Central, especially among whites. Up in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, they're pulling in 49% of the white vote, 53%. You push that up to 58 or 60% in these kind of unionized states, and you'll sweep these crucial electoral college states. And how do you do that? Well, you don't be quite so fanatical about economic issues. You don't be so libertarian. You try to, work out some sort of deal with the working class. And it's not. It's hardly the most radical idea. Now, you go forward 16 years to Trump's first run, and that's pretty much what he ends up doing. And did Donald Trump sit down and read my article from VDare in 2000 and go, oh yeah, this is our strategy? No. It was basically the only strategy he had that showed him a path to victory. So anybody would have come up with the same thing, except for the Republican establishment. They looked at the results in 2000 with Karl Rove as George W. Bush's Svengali, and they immediately took the conclusion that what's absolutely crucial is that Republicans win more of the growing Hispanic vote, and that the way to do that was to let in even more Hispanics. Now, granted, we'll lose money on each one, but we'll make up for it on volume, is the thinking, or something like that. It was never real clear arithmetically how it was supposed to work. But and it didn't make a lot of sense in the Electoral College, since the Hispanic population at that point was heavily concentrated in California, which the Republicans were not ever going to win, and in Texas, which if the Republicans lose, which they might, then it's kind of lights out for the Republicans as a party that can win the presidency. Then there was Florida. Do the dominant Hispanics in Florida really care about Mexican illegal immigrants? I think so. Do Mexican Americans who vote really care about Mexican illegal immigrants? That was a big question. The assumption among Republicans tended to be, oh, well, of course they do. Why wouldn't they? Mexicans are clearly super ethnocentric, like African Americans or Jewish Americans, And of course, this is the most important issue. They want more of their third cousins to pour across the border and drive down their wages. I couldn't see it. And, I don't think the way things have developed since then suggests that Karl Rove knew that much about it. What Rove knew, though, was kind of the internal dynastic plans of the Bush family, that they'd had one presidency, now they're having a second. Maybe Jeb would be a third president. And then there's Jeb's half Mexican son, George P. Bush, was kind of slated in for the 2030s to be the president of the United States that was merging between Mexico and Norte Americana, and a half Bush, half Mexican George P. was the obvious natural leader for the middle of the 21st century in the way the Roves and Bushes of the world thought. So that was the dominant thinking all the way up through the 2013 Republican audit, as they called it, after Romney's defeat. And they decided that the one thing they really had to do was just completely cave to the Democrats on immigration. It was just, let's do what the Democrats want. They wouldn't be misleading us. They wouldn't stab us in the back by importing more of their own voters. Republicans.
Do you think that it also has something to do with maybe the anointed status of having a diverse coalition? Obviously, a lot of these guys want the approval of the New York Times or something, and winning a few more guys in the Rust Belt doesn't really go ahead and get them to any more cocktail parties. They don't get any nice articles written about their willingness to diversify who they're appealing to.
Yeah, I mean, what I call the establishment in the United States is very much aligned with the Democratic Party. Besides the Democrats, you have the prestige press, the mass media, you have academia, corporations, especially when their eyes wander away from the bottom line to getting good PR. You have all the cultural institutions, the sports leagues, the entertainment industry, the NGOs, and they're all roughly united, and let's promote what the Democrats want. And what do the Democrats want? I don't think people have spent enough time thinking about the grand strategy of the Democratic Party, which has been, over roughly the quarter century of this century, is to ride the growth in diversity to political dominance. As everybody knows, diversity is increasing, partly because of immigration, partly because of kind of social disintegration with the sponsorship by the establishment of new sexual and other types of identities. We've seen transgenderism come from basically nowhere to be this massive force in American cultural life among naive, moody teenage girls over the last decade. So the Democrats have positioned themselves as the party of diversity, and there's a lot of good mathematical reason for that, and it's kind of working for them. They've won the popular vote in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections. There's no reason to think that America will get more unified, that America won't stop kind of disintegrating into diverse groups. The problem for the Democrats, of course, is that what they're trying to do is assemble what I call a coalition of the fringes, in which Democrats would probably agree it was like a coalition of the marginalized, the margins of American society. You've got your welfare mothers, your transgenders, your entertainment industry executives, your immigrants, your Jews, your Muslims. It goes on and on. The one thing you can look at and go is, well, how are all these diverse groups that the Democrats have recruited, how do they get along? They don't really seem to like each other very much, as we're seeing, like especially with the Muslims and the Jews, brawling in the streets of West Los Angeles lately. This is not the thing about having a diverse coalition is it's a divisive, divided coalition. So the Democrats and all their accessories in the media and academia have come up with like, okay, here's the one thing that can unite the coalition of the fringes, the coalition of the margins. And that's hating core Americans. We're gonna be really resentful of people in America, who are more kind of like the founding fathers demographically. So the more you're a homeowner, you're married, you're a man, and especially you're white, you're the enemy. And we're gonna just we're going to encourage our coalition of the diverse to just resent you at all times and to speak out against you. So over the last couple of decades, there's been just an enormous increase in the respectable media like the New York Times in terms of racist, anti-white hate. It's just, you can read stuff that's, if it was written about Jews, the Anti-Defamation League would have, a complete fit, but because it's written about whites and when they get specific, white men, white straight white men, cisgender straight white men, they keep narrowing it down to allow groups to carve themselves out and go, oh, we're not the bad straight white men, we're the straight white men who wear dresses or something, so we're good. The Anti-Defamation League would have a fit if you just replaced, if you took 10% of the op-eds in the New York Times and changed white to Jew, the ADL would burn down the New York Times headquarters. But because they write it about whites, and there are no white Anti-Defamation League, there's nothing like that. Oh, everybody goes, oh yeah, white supremacy, white privilege. Got to do something about that. So,
the political scientist Bertrand de Juvenal called this high and low versus middle. He said that this was the best way that throughout history to kind of use the ruling class can use outsiders to unseat the middle that would have more of an established ability to avoid being dependent on the state and the ruling power. I just wonder over time how this can hold together. Like you said, there's already so many possible factions inside this coalition. We're seeing one fault line crack up right now, and ultimately there seems to be a huge problem because maybe this is a consequence of a multi-ethnic democracy, maybe it's not, but when you're aggressively going ahead and exacerbating every one of these kind of fault lines, you're going to run into this issue where, like you said, we have this trans idea now, but the one thing you can't trans is your race, even though race isn't real, but also it's it's immutable. You can't make any changes to it, even though you can change your genitalia at a moment's notice. It's I understand that logically they don't need to hold together. That's not the point. But at some point you realize that these guys are going to try to escape these boundaries that are kind of trying to hold the coalition together. And at that point, the whole thing kind of dissolves, right?
Yeah. I mean, during the decade of the Great Awakening, going back to, say, 2013, the one thing that the Democratic-led establishment could agree on was who was at the bottom of the pyramid of woke privilege. And it was basically guys like me. The whiter you are, the straighter, the more married, you're definitely the bad guy. But who's at the top of the totem pole? And there's been enormous competition for it. For a while, gays were getting toward the top, but then they got pushed aside and coming out of nowhere, the trans folks. Women made a big, strong push and Me Too, but then during George Floyd, they got sent to the bottom. Uh, Jews wanted to be back on top, but quickly the Muslims have been fighting back for the last 8 months. It's extremely unstable. Now, uh, what can be done to undermine it? One thing is you can just keep pointing out how it works, and when you talk about it, it doesn't sound very inspiring or enlightened. It just sounds like childish politics of resentment, of building a voting machine based on hate. And that the Democrats and their friends basically don't have any strategy other than encouraging hatred of core Americans. But core Americans are especially disinclined to call out, like, oh, what you're saying is, well, that's obviously racist. You're just a big racist. You're an anti-white racist, so you think that makes it okay. But is racism really okay if you're just pointing at somebody who's at the bottom of the pyramid of privilege today? I don't think so. But white Republicans, they don't want to call it out. They don't want to call what's going on racist against them. They want to assign it some sort of grand European intellectual tradition and blame it on Marxism, or it's the fault of Foucault or something like that. And it's not that intelligent. It's kind of stupid is what the Democrats are doing right now. So we're just giving too much credit to the Democrats.
Yeah, I have a lot of this feeling too. You look at the current plan, and the plan is to leave the borders as open as long as possible to import any and everyone you can from just these insanely diverse areas. And the argument we get over and over again, along with kind of the humanitarian aspect, is these people are doing jobs that Americans won't do, that they're going to go ahead and take all these manual labor spots, the homekeeping spots, all these things that current core Americans don't want to do. And then we end up with the scenario where we're simultaneously talking about how we're going to automate every one of these jobs out of existence. And so it seems like the entire Democratic plan and part of the Republican plan, frankly, is just suicidal. You know that you're basically importing a vast population whose jobs you are actively working to eliminate, and your entire argument is they have to do these jobs that we're working as fast as we can to make obsolete.
Yeah, I mean, the Republicans tend to be dragged around by the nose by the Chamber of Commerce, who looks at entry-level wages and always goes, we need to get back to the good old days of single-digit pay for workers. We're paying double digits these days ever since Trump came in and kind of slowed down immigration, and then wages started going up, and now we're paying $15 an hour and stuff like that. That's horrible. So the Republicans are constantly, undermining any kind of political strategy that might make any sense for them, just out of so we can make a bigger bottom line right now.
One of the observations you also make in your book is that the big gap in a lot of ways isn't just the male-female gap when it comes to electoral politics, but it's really the marriage gap. And that
Yeah.
having a scenario where you have affordable family formation would really increase the chance that a large amount of people convert into Republicans as they get older. Just going ahead and having that baby, having that marriage radically shapes the way that people vote, over time. But we see very little effort in that when it comes to Republicans. We'll get some kind of noise about making something more affordable, or helping people get jobs or something, but there's never any evidence that they're interested in altering some kind of understanding of the economic system to do their best to facilitate the creation of families, housing is skyrocketing out of control. It's almost impossible. And then, kids are going to school, spending $100,000 in loans. Of course, they can't get a house when they come out. Why don't they address this? And is there any real, like, actionable way to go ahead and make this happen for the right?
Yeah, I mean, let me give a little of the history of my research in this. Started after the 2000 election, and then especially the 2004 election. Everybody wanted to talk about why are there suddenly red states and blue states, and the reality was that this pattern had been emerging at least since 1988, but then Ross Perot's two runs in 92 and 96 made it harder to see. But all of a sudden, 2000, and then once again in 2004, you see this strong divide on the electoral map. All right, so I started looking at what drives some states to vote Republican for president, what drives other states to vote Democratic. And one thing that really jumped out was family statistics involving what I ultimately came down to was what percentage of white women in their younger prime, say from 18 to 44, are married. You could also look at what white fertility rate is, or white legitimate fertility rate, but the marriage one worked best of all, and it just had extreme correlation with how states voted, Republican or Democrat. And so if you take, like, the most Republican state at that point was Utah, and white women tend to get married fairly young. They tend to, unlike, say, Oklahoma, where the state song is "All My Exes Are in Texas," they tend to stay married, and they have kids, and they listen to the Republicans talk about family values, and they go, "Yeah, that's for me. That's what's important to me. I have a family." All right, you look at other states, typically where housing is really expensive, where a public school districts are, highly fought over to get in the good ones, and you don't want to be in the bad ones. Places like California, the whites get married later. They have fewer kids. A lot of them don't have any kids. And so the Republican family values talk was kind of like, yeah, that's not that relevant to me. I'm single. I may never have kids. What do I care about this stuff? I mean, to give you a thought experiment, consider two identical twins, say they're girls, and they grow up, they go to a state flagship college like Ohio State or somewhere, and then they go on the job market looking for white collar jobs, and they each get hired by a bank. One gets hired to work in downtown Dallas, the other one in downtown San Francisco. So what's likely to be life trajectories? I mean, they're identical twins. They're bringing the exact same nature to the issue, but the nurture they get in different states depends a lot, oddly enough, on whether the suburbs can expand in 360 degrees around the downtown core, like in Dallas, where they just go endlessly out into the plains, and so suburban housing prices are pretty reasonable, or in San Francisco, where it's this peninsula that juts into the Pacific and surrounded by bay and mountains and so forth, and so the affordable homes tend to be like a 75-mile each way commute from Stockton. It's just miserable. So in the San Francisco Bay Area, you kind of have to be a real winner in the job competition to really afford the house with a yard and a nice school district and so forth. And so it gets people to move there who really are winners, and they do real well for themselves. But kind of average people, not so good. They may end up like never quite being able to afford to get married or to have a kid or to have a second child or something like that. And so the whole family value stuff that the Republicans, before Trump at least, kind of centered around, it's just irrelevant to them. So that's perfectly natural. What can be done? Well, some of it's geography. You're never going to be able to change San Francisco into Dallas, because if you look at a map, there's just all these mountains and deep water everywhere. But I mean, what you can do is you can encourage home building. You can do things that just basically try to make life a little easier so people can get married and have children. And, so you kind of grow your own voters that way. The Democrats do it with immigration. They do it through encouraging social decay. They've got a plan. The Republicans never really had a plan.
It sounds like in a lot of ways, population density is the enemy of family formation. And if we're only going to have a society where our population density is going to increase, then we're continuously looking at a losing battle for the GOP, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can have dense parts of the population. One thing you have to do is to have people live densely is you have to have a lot of law and order. You can see it like in the last midterm election, the one part of the country where the Republicans did real well running on the issue of this giant wave of crime that took off like within 6 days of George Floyd's death in May 2020 was in the New York City area. I mean, people in the suburbs of New York, they often have to go into the big city, and they appreciated the strong anti-crime push from the 90s onward, like Mayor Giuliani, Mayor Bloomberg, and Police Chief Bratton. New York City went 5 straight mayoral elections with the Democratic nominee losing. And that did wonders for the crime rate in New York, and it made life better for everybody who had to deal with New York City other than the criminals. Now, on the other hand, if you commute to work in your F-150 and you can kind of avoid, having crime affect you, and other than the sense that, well, there's good places to spend my time, and those tend to be more expensive than if the whole place was safe. So yeah, I'm in favor of law and order in general, just because I don't like crime. I'm against murder. But it's also good for Republicans. It's like, oh yeah, we can afford to have another kid. We could afford to move here, or that most areas are safe.
So speaking of crime and specifically statistics, one of the things that's gotten a lot of guys like you and Charles Murray into trouble is being able to go ahead and read into large amounts of data and kind of understand the situation that we have going on. A lot of the ruling class's current political formula relies on the idea that their managerial expertise uniquely qualifies them to go ahead and run things, right? Like they have the science on their side. They're the ones that monopolize data. They're the ones that understand how society needs to be ordered. And yet it seems like they're constantly running away from the kind of data that you and Murray have addressed. Is this a critical flaw in kind of the way that our current elites hold power? Because data seems to only be accumulating more and more, and they seem to have to run from it faster and faster to justify the policies they're trying to implement.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was in the marketing research business in the 80s and the 90s. And, I've always been a baseball statistics fan. I'm your basic kind of, I was your basic kind of frequent flyer guy who read Moneyball by Michael Lewis. I just take I just apply those kind of skills to like looking at the political and social issues of our time. But what the establishment has managed to do is totally censor widespread knowledge of what's going on with crime rates and what's going on with car crash rates, which have turned out to become highly correlated during the various Black Lives Matter eras. So you had, crime was generally dropping up through about 2014, and then the establishment decided, all right, that's good enough. What we need to do is start letting people out of prison. We need less law and order. Law and order is the new Jim Crow. It's racist to arrest guys just because they're packing an illegal handgun and they have 3 outstanding warrants and they were driving 85 miles an hour down the street. That's racist. We should, the cops should pull back, retreat to the donut shop. So they tried that with Ferguson, where Black Lives Matter emerged as this kind of sacred cause of the American establishment. And quickly, the Black death by homicide rate started going up in exactly the places where BLM triumphed, in the St. Louis area, and Baltimore, and Chicago. What people didn't notice at the time, I just saw it a couple times and then I didn't follow up on it after 2016, was that so were traffic fatalities going up in exactly those places where the cops were pulling back and like, okay, you don't want us to pull over Black guys because then sometimes they fight back and then we look bad on the video. All right, we're going to pull over fewer bad drivers. Oh, and then people notice and go, hey, I can speed, I can drive drunk. It's great. I can, when I go to a party, I can bring my illegal handgun and I probably won't get pulled over by the cops and patted down and sent off to jail for having a gun just because I'm a convicted felon. And so then people, if they manage to arrive at their party without getting in a car crash, and somebody dissed them at the party, well, then they got their gun stuck in their waistband and they can pull it out and kind of ventilate the guy who's insulting them and maybe 3 or 4 people standing around in the background. So you just had this huge increase in the mid-2000s, 2010s, in the number of mass shootings with 4 or more wounded or killed. What occurred to me was if you get there's 2 types of mass shootings with 4 or more victims. There's the ones where there's more killed than wounded, and those are the rarer kind, but they get much more publicity. They're the Columbine type, where the shooter has decided ahead of time, like, I'm not coming home. This is it. Maybe I won't kill myself, but I'm going to prison forever. So I'm going to hang around and finish off all the wounded. Thankfully, they're rare, but they're horrific when they happen. Those kind of shooters, mass shooters, tend to be white or Asian, Hispanic, occasionally Black, but not much. There's the other kind of mass shooter who's like, I'm going to kill that guy. And if I miss him with 3/4 of my bullets and hit a bunch of people standing around eating ribs in the background at the block party, that's okay. That just shows I'm a bad man. But I'm not going to let myself get arrested. I'm going to go hang out. I'm going to go hang out at my grandma's house for a few days until this whole mass shooting thing blows over. And the New York Times did a big investigation in 2016, looked at every mass shooting in the United States in 2015 and realized, yeah, about close to 75% have Black shooters and Black victims. It's typically Black social events, a funeral, a rap concert, and it tend to happen on Saturday night. It's an enormous, the blacks die by homicide about an order of magnitude more than whites do. Nobody's allowed to know that statistic. If you bring it up, you're supposed to immediately blame it on white supremacy, on FDR's redlining, on Emmett Till's murder. You just make up some sort of antiquarian excuse. But you're not supposed to go like, oh, wow, That's 10 times worse. That's really bad. Blacks should probably try harder to do something about it so they don't shoot each other so much. All right. So the establishment did a great job ever since George Floyd in suppressing public understanding of what was going on. What I discovered in 2021 was there was a distinct correlation once again, just as during the Ferguson effect, during the Floyd effect, of deaths by homicide going up and also deaths by car crash. Blacks died by homicide in the year 2021, the year after George Floyd, 44% more than they died by homicide in 2019, the year before. Blacks died in motor vehicle accidents 39% more in 2021, when Black Lives Matter was riding super high, than they had in 2019. That's just historically unprecedented. It's horrible. Why were blacks dying so much more? Well, the media, if they ever bring it up, they go, well, it was obviously the pandemic. Not that the pandemic drove up other groups' death rates anywhere near as much, and the pandemic happened all over the world, and Canada and Germany and Japan and Mexico didn't see anything like that. But it had to be the pandemic. It couldn't possibly be the American establishment declaring the racial reckoning at the end of May 2020, and then you instantly see homicide and car crash rates go through the roof for young blacks over the next few days. I mean, you can look at it, it's like Chicago, in its long, storied history of murder, had its most lethal, most homicidal day ever on May 31st, 2020, 6 days after George Floyd's death, with 18 people getting murdered in Chicago. Why? Because the cops were all downtown trying to stop the looting of the Magnificent Mile. And anyway, the cops were like, everybody hates us, and they want to ruin our lives and send us to prison, like this Derek Chauvin guy. So are we gonna destroy our lives just trying to help people who hate us? Hell no. Let's go get a donut. So we had this gigantic increase in crime, especially black on black crime, because of the triumph of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter got vast numbers of incremental blacks murdered and splattered on the pavement in car crashes, and you're not supposed to know that. Why? They'll tell you it's racist to be well informed, but it's mostly because the establishment just screwed up massively. They believed Black Lives Matter's nonsense, and they pushed the racial reckoning, and of course it completely backfired and got over 10,000, probably I'm guessing 15 to 20,000 incremental black lives killed in the years since George Floyd. Good job, heck of a job, BLM, as George W. Bush would say.
Yeah, anecdotally, I know several police officers who said we got the call basically from the top saying, if you get a call from this neighborhood, you just don't go anymore. We just don't bother. It's off limits. And I know from my own personal experience when I was teaching high school during this time, I was in a minority majority school, and basically you weren't allowed to have any discipline, because anytime you had any form of discipline, that increased the overall number of minority students who were suspended. And the one thing we can't see is that number go up. We don't care about how dangerous the school is becoming. And this inevitably led to multiple prison riot style fights in my school, like just sprawling 20, 30 kids all battling on the bottom floor of the school while everyone's hooting and hollering from the steps. This is the kind of thing that is enabled when you make these concessions to try to manipulate numbers. We're going to drive these numbers down. We don't want the bad data. We don't want people to draw the wrong conclusions. What you end up doing is creating a wildly dangerous environment. And when the inevitable pressure cooker goes off, the only thing left to do is say, well, probably racism, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the the people who run things had this logic that they told us about over and over and over again about who are the bad guys in American society, in American history, and they're basically white men. And if we can only reduce the power of white men and tear down their statues and humiliate them and push them out of the important jobs and so forth, then society will become so much better. And then, of course, instantly it went the other way. The murder rate went through the roof. The car crash rate went through the roof. Your toothbrushes got locked up at CVS, and you had to wait around to have somebody unlock the toothbrush case. We'd actually made some progress toward making our cities livable, and the people running things pissed it all away just over George Floyd. I mean, they've been looking for something for the longest time, but it's this giant own goal. And so one of the things I do is I make up a lot of graphs going, hey, if you look at this, wow, the week that George Floyd died, suddenly the black murder rate went through the roof, and it stayed high for the next 3 years. And hopefully it's finally coming down now. But what a disaster, a self-inflicted disaster on the fabric of American life. But people don't know about it because the media, basically has been conspiring to tell everybody, well, that was obviously the pandemic. We can't explain why it was the pandemic. All these tests suggest, no, it was basically George Floyd, racial reckoning. But what we've done now, to disprove that, we've just memory hold the whole racial reckoning, George Floyd, BLM thing. We don't talk about it anymore, which actually seems to be doing some good in terms of the crime rate. The less the establishment talks about how evil the cops are and evil white men are, the less crime there is. Maybe they should draw a lesson from that. But more likely, if they make it through the next election, they're just going to go right back to what they were doing under Trump's first term. It'll be like in 2009 to 12, Obama tried to put a lid on his more liberal, radical, progressive staffers, and like, okay, let's keep the anti-white hate buttoned down till after the election. And then after the election, it's like, okay, we did it. We got another term. You guys go do what you want. And so you got the Great Awakening emerged around 2013, which turned out to be a huge disaster. So, the Democrats and the media are trying to let's forget about what we were saying in 2020. We're not going to mention it again. That never happened. It was all the pandemic.
Yeah, it feels like Radio Rwanda is not going to get turned down for very long. One more question before I go to the questions from the audience.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, one thing that Charles Murray and Christopher Lasch and others have talked about, they're concerned about, is the IQ stratification inside of society, creating this have not scenario where all of the wealth, all of the opportunity is increasingly focused on those who have certain levels of IQ. It's only achievable by those that can go ahead and do certain complex processes. And we also are creating a scenario where we're kind of skimming that IQ from throughout the country, concentrating it into universities and particular professions and certain cities. And this means that we're going to continually get like a class that's going to qualify for these things, and then everyone else is kind of going to be left behind. As we simultaneously start to race towards just going ahead and making as many jobs as possible on that lower end of the bell curve obsolete, do you see a change on the horizon? Do you see a solution to this problem, a shift in public policy? I know Murray has talked a lot about UBI, but do you think that there's a a way that the country is going to be able to address this, or is this just one of those oncoming trains that we're just not going to get out of the way of until it hits us?
Yeah, you talked earlier about a high-low coalition versus the middle, and that wasn't as detrimental when the economic forces and the cultural forces were increasing the size of the middle. In recent times, yeah, it's pretty much the middle has been getting hammered, especially the lower middle, the kind of people who could get a union job at an assembly line in the past and buy a house and get married and have kids and take a driving vacation to the national parks, that kind of thing. Those people look back and go, "Oh, that was a lot better." In the mid-century part of period in American history. What I don't know about so one thing you could do clearly is tone down the immigration level. Don't import a whole lot of people at the bottom, and be careful about importing people toward the top. You want the Elon Musks and Linus Torvalds and a few superstars, but do you need a whole bunch of nondescript coders? Americans can't really learn to code. I don't know. But there's a wild card here, which is artificial intelligence. And I've spent decades hearing about artificial intelligence on the job in the 20th century. I spent a lot of time talking to the AI experts at the companies I worked for, and honestly, I was always like, this stuff will be here in the 22nd century or something. And then a couple of years ago, boom, it started to really sort of arrive. And I'm kind of clueless as to what the long-term implications are, that you can take a whole bunch of white-collar jobs and maybe go, okay, we don't really need a college graduate to sit at home and write emails all day. We can make this 90% more efficient by having a robot do it. What's that going to do? I mean, do we end up in a society where basically there's one good job, which is artificial intelligence engineer, and then everything else gets automated? I don't know. There's a lot of people that have opinions, and I'm like, I'm 65. I didn't see it coming. I should have, but I didn't. So don't ask me what's going to happen.
Yeah, there's a great question. What do journalists do when they can't even be told learn to code, right? Like when even learn to code is no longer a good advice for switching careers.
I'm not seeing my particular job be outmoded by artificial intelligence, since the way I define my job is to come up with things that are true, new, interesting, and funny. And artificial intelligence has problems so far just with the true part. Maybe they'll get around that. But to come up with something new, maybe, but not what we're seeing so far. But I'm not going to I'm not going to say, oh, well, it's nothing to worry about because I'll be okay for, a limited number of the rest of years of my life. I don't know. So they, I don't really have a clue. I didn't see it coming. It's here, and it's big.
It's so often the case. You just don't know what's going to come down the pipeline next. So all you can really do is try to adjust as things come around. All right. So we've got a few questions from the audience. Before we switch to that, Steve, where can people get your book, and where should they look for your writing?
Well, let's see. My book is called Noticing. It's an anthology of my best stuff, basically from 1994 onward. A lot of kind of the more important articles I've written. It's kind of organized in a way that you can kind of understand sailor thought. It's the table of contents does a pretty good job of introducing me and my concepts. It's available from, you can order it directly, mail order from Passage Press. Just type in Passage Press, and paperback is $29.95. You can get free shipping within the United States with the promo codes Stancil or Wilson. These are a couple of inside jokes about guys that the publisher doesn't like. Okay, well, if you're overseas, shipping is more expensive. You can do Amazon Kindle, instant download, no shipping charge. You can compare the shipping costs at Amazon to Passage. I mean, if you're domestically, I'd rather you buy it from Passage, because then me and my publishers at Passage get to keep the money, and we don't have to share it with Jeff Bezos at Amazon, who I'm told already has a lot of money. But Bezos got where he is by being really good at global logistics. So if you're in Australia or whatever, you might save a lot of money on delivering the book via Amazon. So just go to Amazon, Steve Saylor, Noticing. Sailor is spelled, by the way, S as in Sam, A-I-L, E as in Edward, R. Not like Popeye the Sailor.
And I can go ahead and endorse it, guys. I've got the copy myself. It's really nice, nicely put together. Passage always does a great job with their
It's they like quality physical books. What else? Where else can you read me? I've got a new Substack, Steve Saylor, all one word, .net, and you can subscribe. I've been posting there daily lately, and you can follow me on Twitter or X or whatever Elon Musk calls it these days. Once again, Steve Saylor, and you'll be able to find me there. I'm up to like 128,000 followers at this point, and got some good running jokes on Twitter.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, I'm sure most of you are already following Steve, but make sure you go ahead and do that if you are not. Some comments from the audience here. Well, actually, he says no comments or questions. Only much gratitude to Steve and Auron. Well, thank you, Raspy Block. Appreciate that. Kruper Weirdo says it's really sad watching normies in the pop culture sphere try and talk about noticing. It's so clear that they don't get it at all. Everything is so politicized. I just want to consume. Yeah, there's definitely a desire to not look at a lot of these issues, but again, I think that's why it's so important that people have the
opportunity. For example, one subject I'm really fascinated by are statistical analyses of sports, and I spent a lot of time thinking about the impact of race on sports performance, which you can see on TV around the clock. It's not at all subtle or anything like that. We'll see it at the Olympics coming up, and in the 100-meter dash, the men's final of the 100-meter dash since the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, 79 of the 80 finalists have been men with at least one sub-Saharan African parent. One Chinese guy made it last time. Now, what does that tell us? Well, tells us, there does appear to be what I call human biodiversity. It has some impact on the world. People of different racial ancestries are sometimes better at one thing than at another thing. And I look at the sports world and go, yeah, okay, that's obvious. And you know what? We can live with that. A problem that normies have is that they sort of assume that if they notice it, mention it, then all of a sudden people can't live with it anymore. And so we just shouldn't ever think about it. But no, my view is, you should think about sports. It's kind of a level playing field. It gives you a lot of really good analogies and insights into how other things work. And guess what? Sports work pretty well with people being relatively straightforward about how they think. So, learn from sports.
We've got Torin McCabe here says, Sailor says that the best thing to do is to point out their anti-whiteness, noticing it may be the best thing, but is it the only thing necessary, or do we need Rufo politics or white identity politics?
I mean, Chris Rufo has been extraordinarily effective over the last few years, since 2020. The guy's just really good at picking projects and making them happen. So I would say pay a lot of attention to Mr. Rufo. He's good at it. I was a marketing researcher, not a marketer. When I tried to do a few marketing things, it always completely failed because I just wasn't right on the wavelength of consumers. Chris has been brilliant about it. So I'd say pay a lot of attention to him.
Yeah, certainly one of the most effective actors when it comes to right-wing politics in a very long time. And then Robert Weinsfield here says, what would you recommend to make this better? Sorry, that's kind of unconnected to a particular topic, so don't know how to answer that, but thank you very much for supporting the show. All right, Steve. Well, thank you so much for coming by. It's been fantastic talking to you. And if anybody, again, is not following Steve, not reading his work, has not picked up the book, you should make sure to go ahead and do that. If it's your first time on this channel, guys, make sure you go ahead and subscribe on YouTube, turn on the bell, notifications, everything, so you can catch this when it goes live. And of course, if you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you can go ahead and subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you'd like to pick up my book, you can do so, The Total State, on Amazon as well. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, we'll talk to you next time.